Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Blackdog Cast. It's been a few months since I've published an episode. A lot's happened in that time. We've moved to Austin, Texas from Southern Oregon, which has been a big change. I managed to sell a business that I bought a few years ago. At some point, I'll do an episode about some of these life changes and the impact that they've had, because it hasn't all been very easy. But for now, this episode is one that I recorded a couple of months ago. It was sort of put on hold whilst the move happened and, all that sort of stuff. So I'm pleased to be able to finally get it out. So in this episode, I'm talking to a good friend of mine from from the world of cycling. We met on a Rafa Prestige ride in Portland a few years ago. And so Kyle Duford is executive, successful agency leader. And what I think is really interesting about this chat is not only what Kyle shares about his battles with, depression and some pretty big life changes a few years ago. What's most interesting is how he's overcome that and his path since then. And this includes a couple of major themes. So one of them is, he reunited with the love of his life from his college days. And then second of all, we talk a lot about how religion plays a role in Kyle's life and how kind of refinding religion helped him, with this overcoming his problems and getting back on track. So for me, it was fascinating because I'm somebody that is not religious. I'd probably describe myself as a sort of spiritual atheist. I'll be honest, a lot of the time I'm turned off by organized religion and Christianity in particular. So it was fascinating to dive into this with Kyle and really talk about the role that religion's played in his life over the last few years. So have a listen, dig in. It's a fascinating conversation. Kyle's actually written a book about his experiences over the last few years, which is available on Amazon now. So I'll put a link in the show notes. And stay tuned for more episodes. So let's talk to Kyle. All right, Kyle. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for making me do this.
No, it's a pleasure. You seem to be quite comfortable in kind of talking about your story and being open about it, which I guess goes with the territory of having a book out right now, which we can talk about in a minute. I guess just to sort of frame it, you and I we've been sort of friends, professional contacts for a few years. I think we met on one of those Rafa Prestige rides in Portland, and then this was what, probably
that was 2016, I think, right?
14 maybe 14 15.
It could be. Yeah.
And I remember we hung out a bunch at the time, and you were it was clear you were going through some big changes in your life. I guess just reading, I haven't read the book. I've read the sort of the intro to the book. I didn't realize at the time kind of the extent to what you were going through. So I think that's, let's start there with sort of, explaining a little bit about what happened back then. And I guess let's talk about the depths before you go into kind of, your story coming out of it, right?
Yeah. It's a lot, I guess. You said you didn't realize I was going through that back then. And I don't know if I realized I was going through that back then. I knew I was hurting, and I knew I wasn't right somehow, but I didn't know enough to know that I was probably clinically depressed had I gone and got diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I had made a series of mistakes in my life. And it's hard to say if I did because I was depressed or I got depressed because I did those things. But I had chased a lot of things in my life, I'm not sure if this actually comes out in the book. It's probably implied. But I grew up without a dad. My mom worked 3 jobs to put my older brother and sister through school. And so I was a latchkey kid. I was a classic American latchkey kid in the 80s. And so from the time I was 6 years old, I came home with a key tied to my shoelaces, and I was by myself most of the time until dinner time. But a lot of the times when my mom was working that third shift, well into the evening, sometimes 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I had to put myself to bed. I had to make my own dinner. It was like a microwave dinner. Microwaves had just come out in the 80s. And so I was just this traditional, latchkey kid. And a lot of damage was done to my psyche then. A lot of fear was instilled in me, a lot of worth and value that I didn't even know I carried with me. This sense of, I had a lot of attachment issues. I had a lot of abandonment issues. And I didn't understand that. And so a lot of it manifested in a lot of fear. And so a good portion of my life, I just chased things that I thought would fill that void. And around the time that we met and we're hanging out, I was probably at the top of my career, leading the whole digital and e-commerce division for Dr. Martens. I was on the senior executive team globally, and it was the youngest one, the only American. And it was, I had thought that I'd gotten where I was supposed to be. And yet I still had the same issues. I still had the same.
This is
problems.
so common, right? It's especially with men in their sort of 40s of we chase those things that people expect us to do, right? And career is one of them. And so people chase job titles and salaries and all that sort of thing. And then I think you just get to a point and you're like, what else? Like this is not fulfilling me. And what else is out there, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly where I had found myself, where, I thought flying first class every 3 weeks to my apartment in London was, I'd made it. And to the outside world, to this, perfect Instagram life, it appeared like I did. And, but and it just took a lot of therapy to figure it out. But what I was doing was I was trying to put myself out there in hopes people would look at me and go, wow, look at him. And that was this false sense of belonging, this false sense of admiration, value, which was just all BS. But yeah, it was weird because I remember coming back, and I do talk about this in the book. I remember coming back one trip, and I'd gone back and forth so many times within a very short span that I got sick, and I was also just mentally fried, and I literally didn't know where I was. And I remember one of my team members came into my office, and they finally got my attention, and I said, "Yeah, what's up?" She's like, I've been calling your name for like a good 20, 30 seconds, and you just look like you're catatonic. And I'm like, no, you haven't. And she's like, yes, you were just standing here looking at the wall. And in my mind, I was just trying to figure out, was I asleep? Was I on a plane? Who am I? And I just started to break down from there. And that just started just a series of events where I just started just breaking down further and further and further, and realizing that all these things, as I was shedding them quickly, it was very painful. And, it culminated in a suicide attempt and just really, really severe unhappiness and a divorce from my wife, an affair with her friend. I was living a life that I was not proud of, and was just grasping at straws to try to stay afloat, and nothing worked. So I didn't know what else to do. So yeah, it was a tough time period. Yeah.
So then, So what happened to sort of what was your sort of first step out of that, that the depths of that where it got really bad?
Well, the first step was, and I have to give credit to this moment, was I had, look, there's a lot of people who suffer from suicidal thoughts and severe depression, and I really don't want to paint the picture that I was there. I was very, very close to there, but I don't want to make light of a situation which many people deal with on a very, very serious note. Not to think it wasn't serious for me. I drove into my garage at the family home. I had already moved out, but I was driving home to pick up some things, and I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. And I drove into the garage. I shut the door. My Jeep was still running, and we're talking probably like maybe 8 to 10 minutes in there, and just my life flashing before my eyes, like in the sense that I was just like thinking about all these things. And what came into very crystal clear view was my children. And I have 3. Now I have 6, but I had 3, an older daughter, 2 younger children. And the only thing I could think of was how my soon-to-be ex-wife was going to explain how they just drove into the spot next to me and found daddy dead.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that to my children. And that in that moment, that instant moment, I was like, that's who I'm living for. I need to live for them. And I realized that there's just, it's not just my children. I mean, I live for them, but it's not just them. It's that I had, in that moment, I feel like I had the opportunity to do something in the world that I didn't know what it was yet, but it wasn't those things I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was this moment of kind of like, if it was like fuzzy clarity, if that makes sense. Like I had enough clarity to know I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing, but I didn't know why, and I didn't know what was next. So that was the start of it. And like I said, I already moved out. I had a small little apartment. It was the place you had gotten an Airbnb in the same building.
Yeah, I remember.
I think that was the actual last time I saw you. And so I was in that place. I had a bed on the floor, a TV, and a bike on a trainer in the corner. And I had a lot of time just to think. And I decided to go. Then I got fired, which was out of left field. And I decided to go to Hawaii for just a couple of weeks, just to ride my bike and clear my head and not be around people and just try to figure out what life was. And something on the plane, while I was on the plane, I could picture exactly where I was, where the seat was, and what I was doing. And something clicked in my head. Now I believe it was a spirit of some sort, but I just decided whatever's out there, and I actually said whatever's out there, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or universe or Mother Earth, whatever it is, I don't care. Whatever that thing is, I just made a promise that I'm going to say yes to everything on this trip. I'm going to be open to experiences. I'm just going to see what remember, I didn't know what I was going to do next. So I was like open to experiences. Mm-hmm. And that trip was, it's why if you turn my book upside down, you actually see me riding my bike in Hawaii. It's this little double picture on the front. That trip just changed everything for me. And that was really the big turning point. Yeah.
Was there a particular thing on that trip that you did say yes to that maybe you wouldn't have done before that changed this?
If you've seen the Jim Carrey movie Yes Man, which I think was based on a real book at some point, where
it was a book by a British guy. I think I've read the book. It was a British guy read the book who he basically said for a whole year he was going to say yes to everything, wasn't it?
Yeah. And that's really what I did. I mean, in more of in that bent than the Jim Carrey one. I literally got off the plane and the Uber driver's like, "Do you want to sit in the front seat?" And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. I mean, I would have normally been like, nah, it was just too proud and too prideful. And I also didn't want to get hurt, which I think they go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And so I would just never open myself up to anybody. Because I was by myself, I always just felt guilty my whole life. A person by themselves eating dinner at a table that could be used for, a waitress could get more money, if they had a full table. So I'd always go sit at the bar, and I did this on that trip quite often. I'd sit at the bar, read a book. I had a copy of Brene Brown's Daring Greatly with me, and the chef, the bartender, whoever it was there, sushi chef at one point. They would say, "Are you a local?" And I'm like, "No, why?" They're like, "Well, you're visiting?" I said, "Yeah." "You're here for work?" "No." "Well, no one comes to Hawaii by themselves. Like, why are you here alone?" And it always came to that because it was very clear that no one just vacations alone out there. And I'd say, "Well, I'm going through this midlife thing and got divorced, pretty down, kind of depressed, just got fired." And every single one of them would be, in some weird way, would say, "Do you want to, okay, well, like, you do anything tonight? We have a dinner club every Tuesday night." Or somebody was like, "Do you want to go?" Ironically, somebody asked me, and I tell some of these stories in the books, somebody asked me, do you want to just go for a bike ride? And I normally would have said, guys like you and I who think we're hot stuff on a bike. I'm like, this guy's in his late 50s. I'm like, I don't want to go riding with him. It's going to slow me down. And I'm just very prideful. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And he just dusted the floor with me. I mean, he was amazing. But all those people at some point or another mentioned Jesus to me. And it was very strange because it just became a very, very common thing where I would almost expect it was almost comical. Mm-hmm. I had a brand new Jeep. I ended up renting a Jeep later in the week so I could tour part of the island. And I remember it had like 100 miles on it. And the battery died at 2:00 in the morning. Well, that's the time I finally got a tow truck. It died when I was leaving dinner one night. And I'm like, I was supposed to get up early and climb Haleakala on my bike the next morning. And I was like, this is crazy. And so I found somebody at this little candy shop around the corner where the Jeep was. And I said, "Hey, are you guys local? Yeah. Do you have jumper cables? Yeah. Listen, Bo, can you help me out?" And I'll never forget. She goes, "Yeah, I can help you out, but not right now. I'm going to go meet some friends around the corner. We all work in the neighborhood. We all get beers and play pool." And it turns out it was like a little like a group of friends from church or a Bible study or something. It was that kind of thing where I just felt I was being chased. And part of my story back when I grew up was I became a Christian when I was 16, and I quickly left my faith for a number of reasons in college. And so I always felt a little chased, but this was like unnervingly so. And I don't know if people are listening, if they think I'm crazy or not, but I remember just really feeling like there was a God who was chasing me saying, hey, listen, I want to let you know that I can go anywhere you are. And no matter where you try to hide, no matter where you go, I'm there already. And it was really profound for me.
Yeah.
And the very, very last thing that happened was it was after 2 weeks. I'm packing up my bike, I have to put it in the bike box and the whole deal. And I had some time to kill between that and getting the flight. And so I stopped at a little restaurant in a northern town on the North Shore called Paia. Very, very cool little town. It's where you actually start the climb up to Haleakala if you're on your bike. And I just had a margarita pizza and a beer and was just hanging out. And I heard this voice on the news, which I would identify in a heartbeat anywhere. And it was the gal I was engaged to 21 years prior, who happens to be Billy Graham's granddaughter. We were engaged in college, and in a pre-internet world, everything was just coming to fruition. Now there was no texting, there was barely any email. I don't think there's no one had any devices to contact one another. She went home for the summer. We were supposed to get married that fall, and I never saw her again. She drove away, and I thought I was going to see her in a couple of weeks, and we'd get married in a couple of months. And I literally 21 years later, never became friends on social media. Didn't even know where she was. She got married. And then subsequently divorced. I got married and obviously divorced in this part of the story. And at that point I was like, okay, if I was God and I wanted to prove to Kyle that I existed, I would bring this woman back into his life to show him. And that changed. It changed everything for me. And now we're married. It was a pretty crazy thing.
Yeah. So let's dig into this religion and God piece, right? So like I'm I'll be honest with you, I'm agnostic. I believe in some sort of higher power, spirit, whatever. I'm not involved in any sort of form of religion, that sort of thing at all. So I'm curious. You said you became a Christian when you were 16, right? Mm-hmm. And then you left it behind when you were in college. Did you grow up in a family that was actively religious? And what made you pursue that at such a young age yourself?
My mom grew up in a very Catholic home, and so she had vowed that I have a brother and sister and myself, and she had vowed that we would not be raised with any religion. Because if you think about, she was born in I think 1940. She went to college in 1958 or so, still thinking that if she sat in a toilet after the last person on it was a guy, she would get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And it's 1958. So it's a while back, but I was like, that's crazy. And she didn't want ever that happen to us. She didn't want to shelter us at all. She let us do whatever we wanted. And that was, she figured you guys will make your own mistakes and figure out life that way. Part of it was because she wasn't around a lot, but part of it was just like she just didn't want rules around us. Mm-hmm. And so no, we didn't grow up with religion at all. A Sunday was cleaning day in our house. We'd wake up and we all had a chore to do. We had to, clean or vacuum or clean the kitchen or something. And so when I was 16, and this is part of the book as well, when I was 16, I met a college guy who was actively involved with Young Life, which is a high school youth ministry here in the U.S. And actually, I think they're international now. And I didn't know that. He just took interest in me and my best friend, Alan. And we hung out all summer long. And this was a guy who loved us for who we were and made us feel cool and accepted and welcome. And it was refreshing to me growing up, again, without a father, not really knowing who to turn to. And this guy was like, hey, you don't have to be somebody you're not. And we became really, really close. And once he had earned the right with us to talk to us, one day I flipped out at him and I'm just like, who are you? Why do you want to know us? And he's like, you guys are cool. I'm like, that's BS. Tell me the truth. What are you, a weirdo or something? Are you a pedophile? Like, what the hell? I was just really demanding answers from him, kind of obnoxiously. And he's like, no, it's because of Jesus. And I was like, whoa, I don't know what that means. I just know that's some religious thing and that's not me. And So I don't want you to ever talk about that again. And he's like, all right, well, can I still hang out with you? I'm like, as long as you don't bring up this Jesus dude. And we remained friends for years and years and years. And a couple years later, he's like, hey, do you want to go see what this thing is that I do in this Young Life Club? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And I told my buddy, let's go. And so we went out to a neighboring school, which had a really established what they call club, which is a once a week little meeting. And it was always at a kid's house. And we walked in and there was about 150 kids in high school just sitting in this room. And now I know that we purposely came in late because he wanted to make a scene. And that's who this guy was. He was obnoxiously, in that sense that he wanted to bring attention to us. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to bring attention to us. So we felt like we were somebody. And so we walked into this room and he's like, he pointed to the middle of the room. We're going to sit right there. And we had to take our shoes off and we walk in, we sit down. And in that moment, and I could see it like it was yesterday, in that moment, we're surrounded by these girls. And we're talking like I was not a popular kid in high school. Girls didn't talk to me. I wasn't part of a crowd. It was just, I wasn't cool. And more people, let alone women, talked to me in those next 5 minutes than ever in my life. And I was like, okay, like what's going on here? And they're just like, yeah, just welcome. And they accepted us for who we were. And I just remember that feeling was so palpable that when the leader got up at the end of, singing some songs and stuff, he's like, hey, this is Young Life and we're going to Florida in December. And I looked at my buddy Alan, I'm like, we're going to Florida. And it was like 400 people, 60% of them are women. It was like, or girls back then. And it was just like, I just wanted to be around that energy.
Yeah.
And when I heard the message down there, when they were talking, we'd have fun during the day and do a whole bunch of things. We went to Disneyland, all these great things that you do at a Young Life camp. And the message just resonated with me. And I remember the leader said something about like, they're talking about a story in the scriptures where Jesus meets Peter and his brother Andrew, and they're casting their nets to get fish. And he says, have you ever cast your net for sports and it comes out empty? And I'm like, yeah, like that's me. Have you ever cast your net for girls and it comes up empty? I'm like, yes. And how about grades or trying to get into school or driving the right car? And all those things were just such a poignant, unfortunately, a reminder for me that I really didn't have anything and I didn't see any value in myself. And he said, well, Jesus will fill your nets. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And I probably really didn't know what that meant until very recently, but I went, okay, I want that. I want what that is. I want to feel that acceptance. And so I gave my life to Christ and I thought, that was all. But I was too young to understand, and I didn't have the support system around me to understand what it meant to be a believer, what it meant to live like he lived. Instead, I just took the immediate legalistic route, which was, oh, you have to read your Bible, you have to act this way, you have to listen to this kind of music, which was such a wrong thing to do. Yeah. And that's really why when my faith broke apart, it was because I was hinging it on that stuff. And so, it was. So I lived 20 years of my life without God in my life, purposely. Yeah. But that was in between.
It's interesting hearing you describe that experience when you were 16. And I think one of the things that religion provides a lot of people, if you take out the sort of the dogma kind of faith piece, the community aspect is super important, right? And I think what you just described is you walked into a place where you were welcomed into a community, and that's something that a lot of people don't have, right? And especially in modern life, people don't have. And whether it's organized religion that provides that or something else, it's definitely important, and it's really lacking in a lot of people's lives right now, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There was a movie called The Bridge years ago. It was a documentary, and it came out. It was about people who they filmed the Golden Gate Bridge for one full year and literally filmed people who had jumped to their death from a distance. They had cameras set up 24/7, and
I heard about this. I haven't actually watched it. I'll go back and find it.
It's really, really hard. It's really difficult to watch because you're actually seeing people make the decision. But I think, and I'm probably misremembering this, but it was something like this where there's a couple of people who did survive and told their story, and one of them said something to the effect of, and I hope I'm not conflating with something else, but the gist is true. And that is, he said, I just wanted on the way to the bridge, knowing I was going to kill myself, I just prayed that one person would say something to me.
Yeah.
And if you know the Golden Gate Bridge, the pathway on that side, the closest to the city, it's super deep. It allows pedestrians and cyclists, and there's people all over the world come there to see it all the time. It's always full, even on rainy, gloomy days.
Yeah.
And not one person he walked by said anything to him. And it's like people could have changed that person's life. And I believe that person lived. But that's what I've realized is that, I think the world's going to hell in a handbasket, as my grandmother would say. And, it's everything's changing. Everything's just, it feels like the world is on fire. And I think we have a responsibility incumbent upon us, people who have it a little bit more together or have been through something, because I definitely don't have it together at all, but who have been through an experience that you almost called it an end, or you didn't go to therapy, or you didn't take the drug that would help you cope. I think it's on our shoulders to help one another out, especially for men.
Yeah,
I can't think of one guy who I know until I came forward among my peer group and said, this is who I am and what I struggle with. I can't think of one person who willingly said, I struggle with this. X, Y, or Z, whatever.
Before you come out and said something, you mean?
Yeah. And look, I'm not taking credit for being the first one. I was just, maybe they said things to other people, but in my peer group, I can't remember one person who said that they struggle with something. And
I've had exactly the same experience with my peers as well.
But it's liberating. It's liberating because I feel as men, there's so much put on us that we have to act and behave a certain way. Now, thankfully, in recent years, a lot of those stereotypes and those walls have been broken down, especially in the post-Me Too movement. I think people have been very introspective in realizing that you shouldn't act this way or you shouldn't be this way. But I think we've been kind of bred in our society to have it all together, to pretend we have it all together, to have the job, to take care of things. And we need help. I mean, I'm proud to say that my wife and I, we always not always, but many times in text messages, when we're walking through an issue together or, she's going through a bad day or something, it'll be #partners. And we mean that seriously. Like I see her as my equal. I think she's actually better than I am, but we're equals in our relationship. And that's not a very, what's the word I want? Popular opinion, which is crazy to me, especially in Christian circles where people think that men were created to domineer women. I just think that's BS. I think we were created to complement women. I think they've been created to complement us, or whatever your sexuality is, actually, for that matter. I think your partner should be your person. And I didn't ever have that. And because I was chasing the wrong thing, I didn't have somebody that I was invested in. My ex-wife said to me at the throes of the height of the bad part of the divorce, she looked at me and she's like, I don't even know who you are. Because I was telling her all these things that I've been dealing with and who I am now and who I'm trying to be. And she's like, I don't know this person. I'm like, I don't know who I am. So it's like, I didn't have any real relationships. And now that I do, certain people think I'm being, maybe a little selfish and, talking about my book and how I met my wife. And I'm sure there's people thinking I'm sure there's people from my past who've either heard about this or read it. And I'm thinking that, that Joker from, the last 47 years, like he's full of shit. But this really is who I am. And I find it's just it's a liberating way to live. So if I can have those conversations with my friends now, and I try to, we have a staff of about 20 people here at the office, and I try to be, 60% of them are men or so. I try to be that way with our staff. My brother-in-law works for us, and we try to build a place where this is safe, where if you're dealing with something, somebody here should be able to be the one you can confide in. If it's not me, it could be somebody else, and create an environment. And we do this at our home as well. Create an environment where anyone is welcome, and there's no judgment. Man, there's no judgment at all, because that's the thing which prevents people from being honest and open with themselves. So it's I don't know. We can talk about this forever, right?
Yeah. Well, what happened? Give us the brief. What happened next after you saw your fiance from when you were in your 20s on TV, and you felt like this was a message that was coming from somewhere. Like what happened next?
Well, I should be clear that I didn't receive the message like, oh, you will marry her. It was more of a message of like, as much as I wish that was true, it was more of like, hey, like, I'm here. Like, just know that I'm here. And so I wrote her right away, and I found her on social media right away. Her name is Jerusha, and so it's not a very popular name. And so I don't think I ever knew her married last name, and I looked her up, found her on Facebook right away. Mm-hmm. Which I'm not on anymore, by the way. But I Facebook Messenger her, and I just said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I just want to let you know that I just really appreciate that you're part of my life, and you were very important to me." And it was something like that. And what you did on TV was remarkable for. I think I said like what you did was more impactful for. This was right in the Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels days, and she stood up on behalf of women, minorities, immigrants, Christians, Americans, and she went toe to toe with the president of the United States.
I was going to ask about this. Look, we can come to this in a minute when you finish this part of the story.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But and so I just wanted to let her know that I was proud that I knew her, and she wrote back and she's like, "Not remember you? What's wrong with you? Like we were going to get married," and I was like, "Well, I didn't want to be presumptuous." And it wasn't for another couple of weeks until we reconnected again and over text and that's a different story, but we reconnected and that's when we started talking every day. Mm-hmm. And I was driving back, you know, the road, Interstate 5. I'm coming up from like Ashland up to Portland, and I'm driving that road and it starts pouring down rain. And I'm not talking like the drizzle that happens in Portland. I'm talking like pissing down rain. Yeah. And we were on the phone for a long time because I went down there for a reason and came back. We were on the phone all day long, just talking. We're getting to know each other. This is a couple of weeks into this new relationship, whatever it was. And I hung up the phone. It's like 8 p.m. or so. And it was just gushing down water. Like someone was dumping buckets on my windshield. And so I had to slow down, couldn't even see the road. And I look at my phone in the seat next to me and I'm just thinking, I can't do this again. Like I can't, it was so vulnerable now. And I'm so open, and I've told her all about my life, you know, the worst of the worst stuff I've done. And she loved me through it. And I'm like, I can't lose her again. It would tear me apart. Like I spent a long time in my life being with a tattoo on my leg that she never knew of, that I got when we never saw each other. After that, it was just this, it was a Hebrew verse from the Old Testament just to remind me that God loved me, which I clearly didn't pay attention to for the intermediary 20 years. And I'm like, I just started bawling. And I started screaming at God. Now, this is on the back of this trip to Hawaii and all these things. I just started screaming. I'm just like, what the F do you want from me? Like, seriously, what do you want from me? Like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of my life. This is probably like 6 to 8 weeks after the garage incident or so. And I'll tell you, I've never heard the voice of God, and I don't chastise those who say they have, but I didn't. But I can tell you, it wasn't audible, but I felt words, if that makes any sense. And it just was just quiet as all get out. And I heard, again, not audibly, if that makes sense. It's very strange to say this, but I heard the words, "Just stop denying me and I got you." And man, I just said, okay. And just like immediately, I just said, all right, I'm yours. I just couldn't fight that anymore. And again, people might believe in this or not believe in this. For me, I've seen what God has done in my life, and I've seen the proof that he exists. And for me, I said, okay. And I made a promise to him at that moment that I would never deny him again. So boldly now, I claim that I'm a Christ follower. I see no other way to live my life without falling apart. Shortly after that, we met up, we fell in love, and we got married. So now we blended our families. We have 6 wonderful children together, and we pretty much picked off where we left off, 20 some years ago. And, like I said, she's my partner. She's the love of my life, but not in the sentimental sense, but literally I've loved her my whole life. And, I couldn't do it without her. So she's an amazing woman in her own right.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story. Going back to that when she was on TV, because I remember seeing this in the press at the time. She's Billy Graham's granddaughter. She was speaking out against Donald Trump, and against, was it her family had endorsed him, and she was sort of calling them out, and it created, you can explain it in a bit more detail.
Well, I mean, the gist of it is, if you close your eyes and you think of what a evangelical Christian is in today's world, you can probably picture her uncle, Franklin, who is her mother's brother, and who's pretty much taken up the mantle of the Billy Graham Evangelical Association. And he has a way of portraying the very conservative view of, you're going to hell if you're gay, you're doing this if you're that, you have to vote Republican, things that I just don't think are true, that we don't think are true. And there's no love there. There's no compassion there. There's no grace. There's no, I've read the scriptures. I'm not an authority on them by any means, but I love the red letter versions, which uses Jesus's words in red. So you can, for dummies like me, you can actually see what he said. And I can't see anything in there that is exclusionary at all. Yeah. And it's not my place. Her grandfather used to say, I'll probably mess this up, but something like, it's God's job to judge. It's the Spirit's job to convict, but it's my job to love. And the best I can tell is that that's what we're meant to do. So whether it's right or wrong to do this or that, that's not my place. I don't even know what the answer is. I just know that some of my best friends are gay. We have an African-American adopted daughter. We open our table to whoever wants to be a part of it. You believe what we believe? Great. If you don't believe what we believe, that's fine too. I believe our job is just to love folks. And so I think he would claim that, but he's very, very, it seems like he signed a deal with the devil in the sense that to get the votes, to get the beneficiaries, to get the money in, to make sure that the association continues to go, it's perpetuated this idea that Donald Trump was some sort of godlike figure. And she just stood up and said, if that's what an evangelical is, then I want no part of it. And she basically, came out pretty hard swinging, saying, I don't believe what my uncle says. And her family, her brothers and sisters are very much the same way. And that's what I believe as well. So, it doesn't matter what you vote, vote on fiscal policies or vote on social policies, but don't vote because you think this guy was ordained by God, because, I can't see anything that points to this guy being a godly figure. And so that's really what she was saying. And then she took a bold stance, She took a really bold stance, and I'm really proud of her. But she doesn't know how to not do the right thing. She sees somebody that's hurting, and she fights for justice any moment she can. And it's maddening sometimes, because sometimes you just want to hang out in the sofa and relax. But I love that about her, that she will fight for people who can't fight for themselves. She fights for the marginalized community. Yeah. We just before we came on the air, you mentioned you want to go into practicing psychotherapy, and she came to me one day shortly, I think it was before we got married, and she said, I think I want to do this like my counselor did for me. I want to do this for other people. And at 40 years old, she went back to school and got her master's, and now she's a practicing therapist. And that because she just couldn't stand by the sidelines and see people get hurt the way we both have in our life. And so, she's a remarkable woman.
Yeah, good for her. I mean, Gretchen and I have talked about it quite a lot, and the sort of the way that the conservative right have sort of hijacked the Christian message in this country, right? And a lot of it seems to us as we're not practicing Christians. It just seems inherently un-Christian. They're not preaching sort of love and forgiveness and community and all of those, what you think about with traditional Christian values. It just seems, mean and exclusionary and prejudice and all of these not very nice things. And it's sort of, it's given Christianity a bit of an image problem, I think, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think there's a guy, I know there's a guy named Andy Stanley, is a famous pastor in Atlanta. I think he did a series called, that the church has a branding problem, or Christianity has a branding problem. Yeah. And I agree with that. I think there's, but again, we can't look to people who are human, who will serve their own needs any chance they can, as the way that we were told and instructed to live our lives. And it's sad to me, and I said this before, in public and on other podcasts. It's sad to me that the one place we're told is where you can find God is the one place I think today, if Jesus came back, he would not be invited into because he was different, because he was radical, because he was probably wearing bare feet. You know what I mean? And, he was dirty and hey, probably
maybe,
not white.
Maybe, yeah, I was just going to say that. Maybe he had brown skin, right? Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's cool. I don't care what he looked like. I mean, he came down to earth where he was. I mean, to think that he looked like, Santa Claus is absurd to me. But regardless, I think he would be looked at in the parking lot of a modern evangelical church today and be rejected based on his looks alone.
Yeah.
And that is systemic in today's society, not just in Christian circles, especially in Christian circles. And I just think that's a shame. And there's some really, really, really great people in the world who do not think the way of her uncle, but think more like other pastors and other people who are accepting and generous and kind and full of grace. Another brother of hers is a pastor in South Florida. He went through a really terrible time on his own and a divorce and a big fall from grace. And he's rebuilt himself in a way that he's like, it's not about how many people come to he had a mega church before. Now he's got a very small church, and he loves his people. And he says something that I love. He's like, God can't remember the sins that we can't seem to forget. And I love that. But we look at other people as if they're wearing whatever we think their sins are on top of them. And one, they might not be sins at all. But two, it's not our place to even think about that. It's our place to love who they are. Yeah. So, it's a tough thing. There's some really great people in the world who love the Lord, and they can be found. But I think a lot of them are hiding out because they don't want to be lumped into this mass movement of Trumpism / evangelicalism, because they're not the same thing.
Yeah. Well, look, let's move off religion briefly. I want to talk about some of the other things that formed part of your sort of, let's call it your recovery out of your depression and everything else. You talked about therapy. What sort of therapy did you have? What was your experience with it? Did you go down the route of antidepressants, that sort of thing? And was there anything else that formed part of overcoming the things that you were going through?
I think there was a stigma associated with all of those things you just mentioned for me for a long time. That again, it's the things that we were told growing up as men. It was weak if you went to therapy. It was weak if you took drugs, and it's like you couldn't be far from the truth. So if anyone is listening who thinks that way,
take the drugs.
Yeah, take the drugs. I've been on. I can't remember. One does one thing, one does the other. I forget which one it is, but all I know is that I've been on I was going to say urging of my wife. That's not true. At the joint decision to come to, she was medicated at one point. She's like, this is the best thing she ever did to deal with some anxiety after her father passed.
Again, I had exactly the same experience. It was at the urging of Gretchen. When my depression got to its worst, she's sort of like, look, this isn't getting any better. I think you need to go see somebody, and I think you need to explore taking some sort of drug here.
Right. And that's not unlike what happened to me. I thought it was going to change me, and I just when I told I think it was a psychiatrist I saw off the drugs, but when I told him, I'm like, I just had this epiphany of life. I'm finally happy with who I am. Like, I don't want to lose that guy. And he's like, well, let's get you on a drug which doesn't make you feel different. I'm like, I don't, you and I are big exercise enthusiasts and ride our bikes a lot. My wife is the same. I'm like, I don't want one that, like, I heard the rumors that guys take antidepressants and they get fat or they lose their sex drive. And for the first time in my life, I was with someone that I wanted to be intimate with. And I didn't want to lose any of that. I felt like I finally knew my identity. I didn't want to be masked. And he's like, let's just try this and see what happens. And he's like, this will just take the edge off. And, it's now 3.5 years or so. I've been on almost 4 years. I've been on this drug, and it just, I can tell midday if I forgot it in the morning by accident. I can just tell there's just I start to get a little bit anxious and worried and sad, and it's just crazy. So that's a big thing for me. And therapy started off as I don't recall ever going to marriage counseling, but we went to like a a family therapist that helped us figure out how to tell the kids we're getting divorced and kind of, how to deal with each other through that kindly. And what we ended up doing with it, the woman had asked me that particular therapist, I think we only saw a handful of times. She asked me who I was going to, if I was going to anyone personally. And I told her, and she's like, I really think from the little I know about you, you should see a man. Now remember, this is I'm doing this while I'm talking to Jerusha in the early days. And so I'm going through all this kind of like, the Jeep in the rain time. This was all like, I'm figuring out who I want to be. And she's like, a guy who is in touch with his feelings should be with a therapist who encourages that. And I said, okay. So she referred me to this one guy, and I owe a lot to him. And he just helped me walk through a lot. But it wasn't like, how are you feeling today? It was like, where do you think this came from? And we talked a lot about attachment disorder and how my mother was present or not present growing up, how my dad was present or not present growing up, how that has turned into one failed relationship after another because of what I expected from that and how I tried to fill this void. We talked a lot about my older daughter and having her very, very young and my relationship with her, and how I had a lot of personal shame in how when I left her mother, that we just how I handled that situation, who I was for her. So that was just a lot of shame there. And it was just a lot of just walking me through the story and seeing that like I'm okay. And I may have done some things that I'm not proud of, but okay, let's fix them and let's move on. And I have a great relationship with my older daughter now. And it's all those things. My dad passed a long time ago, but I wrote a letter to my father just saying how I felt about him and that I forgave him for who he was. And ironically, or serendipitously, I reconnected with his sister, who's quite old now, but and I talked with her shortly after this, and she had told me, and I write this in the epilogue of the book, but she had told me that when my father was dying, it was like a day or two before he passed, he looked at her and said, do you think Kyle knows how proud of him I am? And I'd never heard that before. And that was it floored me. And his wife at the time, when he died, he was married to a woman named Maggie. And she said the only thing in his desk drawer when he died was a picture of my eldest daughter and the letter I wrote him in 1997 telling him I was getting married to Jerusha. And I mean, that's it right there, Yeah. So, but had I not gone to therapy and worked through those things, and if I had that kind of disposable income again, I would probably continue to just go through and just talk about life and how I feel. And, I can tell when I slip into, I'm deathly afraid of slipping into the guy I was right before my life turned upside down. It was such a protective person, and I wore a mask through everything, and I was just deathly afraid of that. So days that I even fear that I'm veering that way, that I get threatened somehow, or somebody says I'm doing a bad job, or I know I did something wrong, or I could have done something better, and I feel everyone else looking at me like they're judging me, even though they're probably not. And immediately I want to go into that persona that is, F you, I can do anything, I'm better than you, and just kind of shed the fear. And you're not really shedding the fear at all. You're just covering it to yourself. And I'm super frightened of that. And so when I get that way, I really have to check myself. And I'm very thankful for the men I have in my life now, my brother-in-law being one of the closest people in my life, and some of the people I work with, and the CEO of the company, and then some of my friends in town, and definitely my wife, who I can go to and say, this is how I felt today. And be okay with somebody saying, yeah, you screwed up, don't do that again. Or, yeah, that was pretty mean. My kids do that to me. My stepkids, we have that relationship where they can actually tell me when I hurt them somehow. And when my words are biting, and I just go, gosh, I've learned how to apologize. I've learned how to say I'm sorry and mean it. And it's been good. So all that drugs, therapy, really good men in my life, my wife, obviously, and I believe a relationship with the Lord that has really just helped me get on the better path. Like I said, I'm not there yet, and I try so hard, but it's where I am today.
What would you? I mean, we're almost out of time, but what would you say to your younger self? What would you say to that guy in his 30s who was, going going down a different path, what sort of advice would you give him?
Oh, man, that's a great question.
Give him a slap around the face.
Yeah, oh, well, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Do that. Like, I'd leave him bloody on the floor so he couldn't hurt anyone. Yeah, I would probably just say, hey, man, just learn how to be kind. Just learn how to be kind. I think that's, had I not had people be kind to me, I wouldn't have known what that felt like. And I'm not just talking about my wife, and I'm not just talking about those people who are around at those moments, but seeing people's grace and graciousness, even though I didn't deserve it. Those are the people that I remember, and those are the people that changed my life. And that, in many ways, is what the book is about. Because if you read any one chapter, it's about a person who I look back and realize that they were put in my life because they taught me humility, or they taught me grace, or they taught me acceptance, or they taught me trust or honesty or whatever. And if you read the whole thing, it's a story about my life and coming back to God and coming back to my wife. But each chapter is about these people that I will never forget, because they loved me for whatever reason at the time, and they were kind to me, and they wanted the best for me. And so I would tell that guy, hey, just be kind. Learn how to be kind. And I think I probably would have avoided a lot of hurt in my life and other people.
Wise words. But also, if you hadn't gone through all of that pain and suffering, you wouldn't be where you are today, would you?
No, and I wouldn't change where I am today for the world at all.
Yeah.
I for the first time in my life, I'm actually comfortable in my own skin, and that feels great.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Well, listen, give us a shout out for your book. What's it called? Where can people find it?
Thanks. I've never promoted it before. It's called Twice Found. The subtitle is Getting a Second Chance at Life, Love, and Understanding God. But it's called Twice Found. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, in both print and like Kindle or Nook format. You can find it on Apple iBooks. You can find it a bunch of different places. So just Google me or Google Twice Found book, and you'll definitely find it.
We'll stick a link in the description.
I appreciate that. I mean, if one person reads it and knows that they're valued and that they're good enough, then I'll be happy. And hopefully that happened already. But if anyone's listening who wants the story, there's definitely some Jesus talk in there, but in a way that I appropriated myself to God and what I saw. So I don't think it's any off-putting to people who aren't of that ilk.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, you've got a great story, and it's fascinating to reconnect after a few years and kind of hear in detail.
I bet.
Your path and what you've been through, and that most importantly, you've come out of it the other side, and you're thriving and doing great. So I appreciate you taking the time to tell us all about it.
Of course. And if anyone's listening and wants to just talk to me for whatever reason, or yell at me or whatever, I would encourage you to just find me. You can find me anywhere. Just Google my name. I'm definitely up for talking to anyone who feels lonely or sad, or it feels like there's no hope. I'd absolutely love the opportunity to chat with you.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, thanks, Kyle.
All right, man. Thank you.